great. Thank you for having me. And I'm glad that I'm in between this time and wine time. So anyway, we'll see how we go. All right. So as Karen said, I'm here today to talk to you about transforming operations to drive a strategic advantage. So I first of all wanted to pose a couple of questions because over the course of the day, I must admit, even I have heard lots of things about strategy, transformation, what it means to you and what it means to your businesses. So when I pose these questions of how do you create a strategic advantage, it's a big question. So hopefully over the course of my presentation today, we can start to answer some of that. And how do you transform operations? You know, what does transformation mean? So ideally, these are all valid questions, and I'm sure you ask yourself them constantly. How do you process work cheaper, faster, while creating a better customer value? This is what we're all chasing. So transformation projects, I believe, are put into three categories. There's the strategic driven. So that is the ones that are around technology or platform. They're very large scale. They usually come with a great big expense. They're very important, but they sort of come under that category. You can then think about process-driven transformation, and with that we're referring to automation, robotics. We've had some sessions today that talk about that, about creating automation and robotics, really important programs. They obviously have an expense that comes with them as well, probably more moderate than the large-scale transformation, and they still take quite a long time to implement. These aren't short-term things that you go into. And then the third one there is the capability-driven. And with that, I'm actually really talking about your people and your processes. Now, these are things that actually frontline leaders and transformation managers can impact. They usually come with a lower cost, more of a quick win type of environment, and therefore you can actually drive real change and have metrics-based performance. So in most transformation programs, the focus is on improving platforms and technology, with an aim to reduce costs, improve cycle times, and provide better quality. This is great, and it should be a focus for all of your businesses. But what about the biggest cost you have in your business? Your people. Imagine a workplace where you actually can realise and uplift performance by about 40 to 50%, leveraging your most valued and expensive asset, your people. Maybe I have piqued your interest. So the outcome of this case study that I'm going to talk about today was a transformation that depended on a problem statement. Now, these problem statements up here on the screen are ones that I'm sure are all very familiar to you. Problem statements that include failure demand, double handling, rework, system issues. I'm sure they all sound familiar. Now, some of these are easier to resolve than others. And ultimately, the idea is to understand the impact to your business so that you actually can drive real change. So we worked with this business that wanted to create a strategic advantage. They wanted to solve some of these operational problems. Opaque operations, they had no visibility. There was too much waste and failure demand. Their management was very reactive. It didn't have the information to be able to be proactive in its management decisions, and they needed to improve staff engagement. So I've displayed it here as an iceberg, because all of these operational issues are often hidden from view. Now, I'm sure we all appreciate the typical characteristics of an iceberg. There is a bit above the waterline that we can see, but there is a great big mass below the waterline that is hidden from view, just like many of these business problems. So we want to be able to make them visible, and this is what happened in this business case. So when I share about this business case, we have actually seen capability-driven transformation implemented successfully and how they leverage their people power to uplift performance. Now, that's especially in a remote working environment. It's more important now than ever to have that visibility. So through having accurate visibility of the workforce's capability, they created a burning platform that instilled change, that was able to instill change in the organisation. The business utilised their data available for people one of them being core, which is productivity, to better understand what was possible to achieve. They weren't yet achieving it, but what was possible to achieve, and to understand how far away they were from that milestone. Now, this business had productivity measures. I'm sure you all have some form of productivity measures, and this business was no different. Their productivity measures were demonstrating that their people were achieving well over 100%. How is this even possible? How can we have reports and metrics that show performance is over 100%? I'm not sure about your organisations and whether you have that or not, but this business most certainly did. So if this is the case, if we have performance results that show over 100%, then there must be waste below the waterline of the iceberg built into the calculation. It's just not humanly possible to achieve otherwise. Now, results like these demonstrate to a business that everything's looking good, and therefore there is absolutely no call to action to drive change. Why would they? Their results are sitting at over 100%. But when we looked a little deeper, the metrics were actually hiding the true capacity of the business and the size of the opportunity. The business, in effect, didn't know what good looked like, and therefore couldn't actually make positive gains in their operational excellence journey. So I'm going to ask you just a few questions, just to answer in your head. I'm not going to call out any of you, don't worry. But how much waste exists in your business? So the first question is, what is the opportunity? So have a think about how many barriers or frustrations your frontline workers would be experiencing on a day-to-day basis today. You know, be it rework, duplication, system issues, pacing, the list goes on. So when I run these exercises with our clients, and in particular with this client, the frontline leaders were able to come up with a myriad of reasons as to why there was an opportunity in their business. That was easy. Then we have to ask ourselves, well, how many hours per day does this represent? Now this gets tricky. Is it 1 hour? 2 hours? Would anyone even be brave enough to think that it might be 3 hours per person per day? Guarantee you it can be, and I've seen it be so. It's a lot of time that is wasted. So if we know that, if we know how many hours are wasted per person per day, then what is the cost to the business? It's very simple maths. We just take the number of hours per person per day, times that by the number of people affected, could be 500, could be 200, could be 1,000, times that by the number of working days in a year, and by a fully loaded hourly rate. Now, if you start to do that maths in your head, you may be thinking of millions of dollars, perhaps even tens of millions of dollars, or even higher. And that's what we've seen, and is also around this business case. For this business that we're doing the case study on, resetting the benchmarks by removing the waste from the performance standards enabled a fresh eyes view into how their people were performing. And it took away what's known as the watermelon effect. You know, the report's all looking green on the outside and everyone's happy, but when you slice it open, everything's really truly red on the inside. Yeah, I'm getting a few smiles. So with waste removed from the metrics, the organisation's new baseline was actually only 45%. Okay, so it's significantly lower than what they thought it was. Now, I'm sure you can appreciate that a 45% result displayed a real challenge for frontline leaders. How on earth were they going to explain to their leaders, to their people, that they thought they were at 120%, but they're actually now only at 45%? So there was a significant change that was needed in the organisation about what that 45% really meant. And it was a change in their mindset. Okay, so this was a challenge for leaders and a challenge for the business. An adjustment was required. Now, the lower result was a true reflection of how much opportunity there was in the business. And it allowed the leaders in the business to better understand the barriers to success. Through this revised lens of productivity, the business was now able to start to identify where the opportunities for improvement truly were and improve on their service offering. So what does this mean? We put a target in place of 80%. not 100. 100% is the whole. 80% is the new target. And they were at 45% when we started measuring this. 80% allows the business to make sure that we're not treating the workforce like robots. They're not robots, they're human beings, and they need to talk to their peers. They need to ask for assistance. They need to make a cup of tea. All of those things are important. So 80% is now a reasonable benchmark for them to be achieving. But they had a way to go. They were nowhere near 80%. So I guess I'll ask the question now, and I guess you know my answer. Is it reasonable to expect that your team members can achieve 100%? I think not. So now that this business has a handle on how their people are performing and the waste that was being experienced, they found that they actually had a couple of main causes of waste. So the first one was quality. Now what I mean by that is the quality of the incoming work. They were getting work in from brokers, and the quality of the incoming work was incorrect and it was missing information. So they weren't able to do their jobs. They were having to do follow-ups and they're having to do rework in order to get through that incoming work volume. So not a great place to be. This data of the incoming work being inaccurate was able to be put in front of the relationship managers, and they went and they met with the brokers and they explained the impact and used real data, data-driven behavioural change in order to actually make sure that the brokers understood how much better service they could be getting if they were able to actually provide the information correctly in the first place. So that was the first one that we overcame. We then moved our attention to actually look at the process. Now, the process itself over the years, as I'm sure you can all appreciate, had many steps that had sort of grown over time. The process had grown to 3 to 4 times the size of what it should have been. The leaders knew that, the staff knew that, but they didn't do anything about it because there was no call to action. The results were really high and therefore they didn't need to do anything about it. So they gained the necessary approvals they needed to redesign the process and therefore were able to get through the work in a quicker time. And of course, they put the appropriate reviews in place to make sure that the process was working. So we had a baseline, we knew what it was before, and now we were able to actually work at a better rate because all of those obstacles or barriers were taken out of the equation. So what's next then? They then turned their attention to the exceptionally high backlogs. The backlog had increased to an all-time high before the project kick-off. The time to approval was actually now more than 15 days, way more than it should have been. Customers weren't happy about it and the business was losing a competitive advantage out in the market. Now, the business felt that they needed more people to do the work. That's how they resolved things in the past. If you have a backlog, you need to throw more people at it. Only they had a new way of doing it now. They understood now that they actually had capacity. They had improved the quality of work coming in, so they had more time in that. They had improved the process, so they had more time in that. And all of a sudden, these backlogs that were increasing have now stabilised. And they actually started to reduce. Now, this was great because it really gave the leadership team the confidence they needed to say, this is working. We actually are able to stabilise where we currently are, and we're seeing improvements week on week. It paved the way for that success. And imagine how good it was for the team leaders who were able to now stand up in front of their team and celebrate successes with their team. The information that they had been collecting was actually making a difference. Now, of course, this doesn't actually happen overnight, and it happened over a period of time. So over that 8 weeks, what they did was actually look at that institutionalised waste that was occurring. Lastly, up on the screen, is the training element. So in addition to this, the visibility that they gained in variation of people performance showed that there was a need to upskill. Now, the system that they put in place also had a skills matrix, so they could see what skills people had and where the skills gaps were. So they put in place a training plan and also a piece of the software that's called Path to Proficiency that enabled them to understand what their performance was like today and for each person to go on a path to proficiency plan to upskill their performance. Now, naturally, as they did that, people actually improved the output that they were actually processing. So that then proved the model as well. The visibility now enabled the leaders to have an understanding of why they had some team members that were performing at 70 or 80% performance and half the team performing at only 40 or 50. There was a great disparity or variation in performance from one person to the next. So that was the journey that they went on by understanding what skill set people had, why there was a difference between those performance results, and ultimately the goal was to uplift everybody to the same level. Now, this has a positive impact on employee engagement. I'm sure you can imagine that with this business, the high-performing staff were being recognised for their efforts. It was visible on all of the reports and they could see that. But the staff that weren't quite achieving those results, it shone a bit of a light on the fact that there was a need for leaders to be involved and to understand what needed to happen to move the needle on their performance. This then gave them the attention that they needed and they were able to lift their results as well, which created a much fairer work environment for everyone, rather than some carrying the weight for many. In our hybrid work model, we're not sitting side by side anymore, so visibility of performance and that variation of performance is even more important. Now, all of this occurred over a 20-week program. Like I said, it just doesn't happen overnight. The initial part of the program was referred to as the construct phase, so that's the initial sort of 6 to 8 weeks. They were able to actually get waste-free processing standards or benchmarks, and analysis was performed to understand how the business was currently performing, what was the current state for that business. That construct phase also enabled them to understand what the barriers and frustrations were to achieving success. So once that construct phase was put in place, the data was then available in Enlighten and it provided visibility that they were only performing at the 45%, not the 120%. So they went on a journey of a change phase for the next 12 to 14 weeks, and we guided them through this change of gaining operational control, using the data to create behavioural change. Frontline leaders started being proactive rather than reactive to the management of work. They were able to actually use the planning and the forecasting tools to understand what next week looked like and have both short-term and long-term goals for their workforce. As I said, this didn't happen overnight. There was a 20-week implementation program that then set them up for success. They saw significant improvements week on week. So I guess the question is, how does this case study relate to your business? As I said, I know we've talked today about many different types of transformation, and this is very ground roots, but what it meant is that they could actually drive a strategic advantage through better customer outcomes. They had capacity to be able to implement into better quality, into reducing their error rates, and set them up for success. So there are many areas that this business achieved transformation. Their goals were to reduce their operational costs. Everyone wants to do more with less. Improve their quality. Reduce the customer complaints, which they did very successfully. Simplify their processes, decrease their turnaround times, and overall have a positive impact on employee engagement. So by the end of the 20-week program, the business could actually see which teams created capacity and reduced their backlogs. They had a single source of truth for their operations, and it was all rich and, I might say, automated data that was being used in this scenario. They could run reports at the click of a button. They didn't have to go and create anything. The reports just were there for them at any level of the organisation. So some of their results, let's have a look. Their productivity increased by over 40%, really significant results. Their unit costs were able to come down, and this was displayed through the activity-based costing measures that were baselined and then reviewed over time. As I said, complaints reduced significantly. There was a massive decrease in complaints. And overall, It meant for a happier workplace. They had a high-performing culture. They had visibility of information. They knew what their goals were. They were working together to achieve them, and engagement lifted. And that was actually a metric that was through the engagement survey results that happened throughout that time, where we actually baselined that and measured it, all part of the suite of tools. Really significant improvements. So, in effect, what's happened for this business is that they turned their iceberg upside down. Big cliche, I know, but that's what happened. They now had transparency. They were able to highlight and quantify the amount of waste in their business. They embedded and sustained real behavioural habits and have a high-performing culture through the operating rhythms and the operating DNA that they put in place. So they now have visibility of performance and an operating rhythm that they continue to use today to ensure that they understand what good looks like. No more watermelons. They leverage this data for continuous improvement, and we've heard a lot today about the Lean Six Sigma principles and DMAIC and the like, and this data was leveraged a lot for continuous improvement as it goes down the track. This transformation is a journey, it's not a destination. It doesn't stop, they keep on going. And they keep on using the data in Enlighten to fuel that continuous improvement. So there are many other user stories, I've pointed out one, that mirror these results. So I might leave a few here on the screen. It's important to note that regardless of your industry, if you have an operational centre, a contact centre, a branch network or a back office that processes work, then you have an opportunity to create real and sustainable results through your people power and using capability-driven transformation. Thank you.